speaker will be Dr. Deborah Vargas, who received her Ph.D. in sociology from UC Santa Cruz in 2003. She is now an assistant professor, assistant professor at Chicano Latino Studies at the University of California, Irvine. That's right. Her project is titled Gloria Rios, El Grito del Rock and Roll. She's going to be interviewed by Associate Director of the Chicano Studies Research Center, Professor Maria Elena Ruiz.
I'm very excited to be here. This is very stimulating discussions tonight. And I'd like to set the stage a little bit first. And what we had talked about is that if you can show some of the clips, those, we're going to have some discussion, and then we'll show the video, and then we'll go back to the discussion. We talked about this because the video, you're going to see a little 2-minute music video that is so empowering and so assertive and aggressive in feminist context that I wanted you to see it and go, wow, and then we'll have a few discussion questions. Okay, very pleased to be here with Dr. Vargas. Her publications have appeared in journals including Aslan and Woman and Performance, and in the Chicano Cultural Studies Reader and Latina Sexualities, Pro-Empower, Passion, Practice, and Policies. She's got such an exciting manuscript on a feminist cultural studies analysis of Chicana singers who performed in the early and middle 20th century, including such people as Eva Garza, Rosita Fernandez, Chelo Silva, and a few others. It was titled Dissonant Divas, Mexicanas, Music and Nation. Now with us with the Chicano Studies Research Center for the spring, she's going to be working on a manuscript and developing a journal article on Gloria Rios. So the first question for you, welcome, is what drew you to the subject, and what is it about Gloria Rios? Because now I know quite a bit about her, but I thought, who is Gloria Rios and why? So tell us why you selected this.
I feel like I'm on the actor's studio. Do I get to say my favorite curse word? Perhaps. Hi, Joanne. Yeah, well, you mentioned my first book that I just completed, and which is focused on Chicana singers, Mexican-American, technically Mexican origin singers, here in the U.S., born here in the U.S., raised. And Gloria Rios is someone who I think, like many of the 30s, 40s elder singers that I found really arrived to me. The singers in my first book, really are, have been unseen and heard and written about. And so, like Gloria Rios, she is someone who appeared to me and really, that I had a chance to really learn about by talking to many of these early singers who were around since the 30s, 40s, and 50s in radio and in early recording. And she is someone who doesn't appear in my book, but partly because I feel that there needs to be, at minimum an article. I'm beginning with that, but perhaps even a book project on her, because just placing her within the context of 1950s rock and roll, mid-1950s to mid-60s rock and rolls really, I think, deserves, a kind of attention that she just couldn't be placed within the book project. And just to give you a little bit of an idea, you will see a clip of hers. And if you feel enticed by what you're going to see in the video, you can actually YouTube. There are probably maybe a couple of more YouTube videos where she's performing some rock and roll tunes. The one that you'll see is actually from a movie, Mexican motion picture, that was out in '56, that she makes an appearance in. But just to place her sort of in context, and we all know or kind of have an idea of what comes to mind when we say Chicano rock and roll, and normally that's Richie Valens and La Bamba, which was about 1958. His recording comes out. A year before that, Freddie Fender records the first Spanish translated American quote-unquote rock and roll tune, an Elvis tune that is translated in '57, where Gloria Rios, 2 years before La Bamba in '56, records El Relojito, which is the Spanish translated version of Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley and the Comets, Rock Around the Clock. And she actually, you know, translated herself most of these tunes that she records, I think, except for maybe a couple of them. So just to give you a little bit of an idea, a quick idea of who she is, but that's, you know, how she sort of arrived to me. Yes, you know, she has a really rich history. She, you know, begins performing with a really popular performance troupe, La Chota Noloesca, who Alisa Rizon and other Chicana feminist performance study scholars have written about. So she gains really early stage performing experience early on in her teens. And then, you know, like other women, I call them elder women because they're elder now, but women who were around in the 30s and 40s, there was a lot more sort of back and forth to Mexico, and oftentimes even Mexico City, to perform on radio or in some of the clubs there. And she was like some of these early artists who went there to perform. And so from a very early age, you know, she, you know, is raised in San Antonio, born and raised. Obviously, you know, is tapped into the American, you know, rock and roll scene. She's also a big, you know, fan of jazz. And sort of like brings together, you know, her experiences and her, you know, interest in rock and roll tunes, and, you know, starts to perform and record some of these movies. And she appears in about 10 Mexican motion pictures that are, you know, in the genre of rock and roll, you know. And the title of the proposal or presentation, I don't know, potentially article, is called El Primer Grito del Rock and Roll, the first scream of rock and roll. And that was coined by a Mexican researcher, Arturo Lara, who first is the first one to sort of like use that to coin her presence, because of the scream that literally you'll hear towards the end of her performance. And that scream is said to have basically launched, you know, a sort of like almost like a sonic launch of like American rock and roll into Mexico and into the ears of Mexican youth at that time.
That this clip is from 1956, and you see her do Ella Fitzgerald, all of these things, and you think, until I got on Wikipedia, right? The literary scholar, and okay, check her, the twist was until 58, 59. She's doing the twist in 1956.
That's actually the point I make in the paper that
okay.
I'll have to quote you on that.
Give me credit too, okay?
That's very true, because when I first saw it, I thought the twist is checker, but it's not, because it's preach of checker.
Okay. Well, a big music buff. How many of us would not have survived adolescence without music, right? Or adulthood. But putting into the feminist, the cultural, music, social, political, everything context, what do you want to do with this ultimately, and what do you want us all to take home, the take-home message here?
Yeah, well, I think that's like TBA. I mean, you know, I wanted to get a chance really to dive in and do a lot more in-depth research on Gloria Rios. Actually, her family is doing a really good job of piecing together her biography, so I also want to go back and talk to them. She has a daughter that's still living, and the daughter's husband has done a really good job. So, you know, going back to actually take time, you know, as I said, I came across her and haven't really devoted the time that I think she deserves. But, you know, in a general, you know, very general way, I just have a number of questions, really, because I think if we even begin with the question of what does Chicano rock and roll mean, you know, we take someone like Gloria Rios. You know, she is someone who, when I first heard of her through some of my other interviews of singers during that same time period, you know, I looked through a lot of the regional labels, the Tejano regional labels. I figured, you know, she's somewhere. Of course, she was nowhere in the secondary literature. But, you know, I was really looking on this side of the border, right? And her RCA recordings were really Mexican recordings, right? So that really opened up, you know, a lot of, for me, a lot of, you know, the tension between, like, really what does Chicano rock and roll mean? What does rock and roll even mean if we place Gloria Rios kind of at the center of that? And then, you know, with that, what does the 1950s sort of Mexican-American engagement with rock and roll mean, right? Through these Spanish-translated songs, through the body, you know, femininity of Gloria Rios at that time, the fact that she is not performing that music here on, so-called this side of the border, but in Mexico City. What does that all mean to sort of these kind of very standard and comfortable notions, right, of rock and roll, Chicano rock and roll that we have that always begin with Richie Valens really at the center of that. So that's sort of just some of the beginning questions that are kind of framing, but really I would really want to accomplish a really, well-researched, in-depth biography and discography of her work. For her movies, I really have to travel to the Cineteca Nacional in Mexico City to view some of those. There are snippets of them on YouTube, but there's just a lot of that I have to get at. But those are some kind of my framing questions to start that off. So.
Thank you.
Oh.
In your studies of Latin entertainment here in America and the influence, did you come across, or in your study, I remember as a kid watching on TV, the famous band leader Xavier Cugat, and then his first girlfriend Elena, and the second one Cheryl, and how did that influence American perception of Latin or Hispanic entertainment compared to this Gloria Rios?
Wow. Well, I think, it's like that other question, it's really a broad question. Well, I think in general, the first way to respond to that would really be to sort of detangle, right, the kind of unique histories of some of these populations that I think especially now, particularly, are getting thrown into a kind of broader category of like Latino, singers and cultural production, right? So if you think about someone like Charo, that's a very different sort of history and racialized gendered representation in a particular moment when she was popular. You have all sorts of things going on there, but how that pertains to the work that I've done is really sort of to really kind of make sense of Mexican American or Chicano history and the relationship of those representations and experiences and lived realities in relationship to so-called American popular culture, popular music. So I would probably begin by detangling what becomes Latin, right, or what becomes sort of a Latino past when it comes to music. Because I think it's really important, especially if you get into sort of the politics of class and citizenship and generation and racialized femininity even, with someone like Charo, for example. So.